There was once a young man named Samuel who dreamt of seeing the world. He had always felt the pull of distant lands, the allure of mountains he hadn't climbed, and oceans he hadn't crossed. But each time he thought about setting off, a deep fear would take hold of him. What if he got lost? What if he failed to navigate foreign cultures? What if the journey was too much for him? For years, Samuel stayed in his small village, paralyzed by fear. The world seemed vast and daunting. He worked, saved money, and read about distant places. But every time he packed his bag, the same fear would rise within him, and he would put the trip off. One evening, while visiting his grandmother, Samuel mentioned his dream of traveling but confessed his fear. She listened quietly and then shared a story. Many years ago, she began, there was a great traveler, a man who crossed deserts, mountains, and seas. But in the beginning, he was like you, afraid. He feared the unknown, feared failure, even feared the smallest challenges. Yet he set out, and every time fear rose, he took one small step forward. At first it was terrifying, but the more he traveled, the more he realized something. Fear is only the shadow of courage. It grows larger the longer we wait, and smaller the more we face it. Samuel was quiet as he processed her words. "Grandmother, but what if I fail? What if I can't do it?" She smiled softly. Failure is just another step in the journey. The true failure is in never trying. That night, Samuel couldn't sleep. The fear still lingered, but now it felt different. It wasn't as overwhelming. He realized that fear was not something to escape, but something to move through. He had spent so long waiting for the fear to disappear, but perhaps the key was to move with it, not against it. The next morning, Samuel packed his bag, determined to take the first step. He boarded a train heading to a city he'd never visited before. Fear still clung to him, but each station he passed, each step he took, it lessened a little. When he finally reached his destination, exhausted and uncertain, he looked back at the journey and realized that the fear he had carried was never as heavy as the courage he had found by facing it. Years later, Samuel traveled to many countries, learned new languages, and saw things he had once only imagined. He had found that the greatest adventure was not in the places he visited, but in the discovery of his own strength. Fear, he learned, was not a barrier, but a companion that urged him to grow. And he often thought back to his grandmother's words, "Fear is only the shadow of courage. The more you face it, the smaller it becomes." Samuel had set out into the world, not because he was fearless, but because he had learned that fear was not something to run from, but something to move through one step at a time.